following program was provided by an independent producer solely responsible for its content. The opinions expressed do not necessarily represent the views of this station, its staff, board of directors, or underwriters.
Hi, this is Ken Gidge, and this is The Art of Politics. And I want to be honest with you. I didn't plan anything for today, not a thing. I'm just a Democrat, which is the best part, in my opinion, of this show. And then the other good part probably would be Bill O'Brien. How are you?
Good to see you.
I'm honest. I'm telling you, I have planned nothing. You better have something to talk about. Well, we could.
So you're just going to proceed on motion. It's just like we're back up in the legislature. It's going to be, everything is reactive.
Yeah, if I remember correctly. If I remember correctly, you never let me up on the, to talk.
Nothing planned at all.
That's right. I couldn't get on twice because of you, if I remember correctly, that law you had of 9 minutes.
That was something that was always voted by the House as a whole.
Oh, it was 297 to 103. I mean, what are you going to...
As Speaker, one of the things I think most people don't realize, I certainly was very much aware of it, is all of my authority was derivative of the House as a whole. I could, make a ruling on a parliamentary issue, and at any given point, all it took was one person to stand up and successfully challenge that ruling.
I'm glad you underlined successfully.
Well, the reason I did that is because
nobody ever.
Your partner in crime there, Gary Richardson. There's a whole bunch of them, but Representative Richardson would pretty much get up every session day and try to challenge me on one thing after another.
Yes,
and breaking a tradition, by the way, and the tradition in the House was always to defer to the Speaker's rulings unless there was, something that was obviously wrong. And it was pretty obvious to us from the beginning, and I think increasingly obvious to the people of New Hampshire that what went on there was a little bit of kabuki theater, that, we're going to challenge him no matter what he does, and then stand back as there's votes on it and say, oh, it's out of control.
Yeah, well, wait a minute. Hold on a second. I love the way you play it. Now, let me, from the other side, it was your group that constantly called for a vote, not the Democrats, but it was the Republicans, always called for a vote, a roll call vote for the silliest things. We couldn't, there was one time when the Republicans were running the place, the Democrats were running the place, and the Republicans would call for a roll call vote, which meant everyone had to come, they had to sit down, and they had to press a button. You could do nothing by vote.
They had to do their job?
Well, you don't have
no kibitzing in the anteroom?
To what? And there are some cases
let's make sure that folks watching this know that there's 3 ways for House members, and this is pretty much the same in any legislative body, to vote. One is a voice vote. We yell out ayes and nays, and the presiding officer will make a determination as to what has prevailed, subject again to challenge and a different sort of vote. There's a second way. It's called a division vote. In a division vote, you'll press, in our case, in New Hampshire, you'll press the button, and the totals are tabulated, but individual votes aren't. So you and I could vote one way or the other. We'd be part of either the majority or the minority on that question, but no one would ever find out unless, I happened to look over at you and say.
Nobody would ever. I got Republicans sitting right behind me.
And
No.
it'd have to be anecdotal like that.
Yeah, I know.
And
Yeah.
then finally, there is the vote that I think should be the default vote, and that's a roll call vote. That's a recorded vote. That's the one that your constituents who put you into office can look at you and your record and say, that's what I put him in
And
for.
you too.
And all of us.
Yeah.
And I only say you because.
Because I'm the best.
Because you usually vote the
Because
wrong
I'm
way.
easy.
Because you usually vote the wrong way, and I wanted to look at your record. But
Oh, really?
but be that as it may, it should be the default vote. If I'm elected out of my town, my neighbors should be able to say, you know what, we sent him there. He's a representative. It's not like he's just voting on his own. It's not a secret ballot like we vote in elections. He's voting for me.
Are you saying every vote we have should be a roll call vote?
It should be the default vote. Now, and so when we call a roll call, there should be nothing in the way of the resistance we've seen in other sessions. As Speaker of the House, I welcomed roll call. First of all, it didn't take that much time to have a roll call vote. People say it costs thousands and thousands of dollars to have for each roll call vote. You know what they do is they'll take the 200 or 300 roll call votes that we have each year, divide it into the whole budget for the House, and then they'll say, oh, that must be the cost of it. We actually looked at what the incremental cost is. It's about $60 or $70. Not an insignificant amount of money, about $60 or $70 more, which is just the photocopying of the printout of the vote. I think that's a small price to pay so that we have a permanent record as to how people voted.
I don't disagree with you. I agree with you, but we both know that there are bills that come from committees that come out, and in the committee, it's usually either majority Republicans or Democrats. But when you get something coming out of the committee and it's 22-0, that's not really necessary in the sense to do a roll call vote.
Except we've seen those unanimous committee recommendations overturned.
We have seen, yes, one, I think, it was yours. 70, in fact, it was 100%. That's right. Everyone voted for it. You brought it up, I believe. The Republicans brought it up, and then you voted it for it or against it. I can't remember exactly.
Yeah, whatever the case.
But that's very, very.
It is very rare. But
Yeah,
but
it
again, I think it's appropriate that one, we slow the process up at times and say, are we doing the right thing? And two, we report to the people. And a roll call is a report to the people.
Well, of course, everybody agrees. Everybody agrees on that. As far as I know, I'm not disagreeing with you. I'm just saying
just
that a lot of it is
votes.
not necessary.
Well, again, it's not necessary as a subjective consideration. I want to throw into the mix of considerations there the fact that people have a right to know how we vote.
They do. I agree. But in our committee, we have had bills come in whereby people who fought the Civil War, their bones were brought to New Hampshire, all right? And the party who lived in another part of the country wanted half the bones. So we got to pass a law on that. So when it comes out on the committee, no, should that be a roll call vote? I mean, that can be a voice vote.
I'm not sure of the bill. Don't recall the bones.
I'm just making it
I
up.
don't recall the bones bill.
No, actually, it was a voice vote that we did have something like that.
There was an allocation of the bones.
Yeah, well, they wanted half of them back. And
Why only half?
I'm in commerce,
Why
right?
only half?
Pardon me?
Why only half? I mean, were they doing like
No, half of half. Half were missing, I think. It was something ridiculous like that.
Yeah.
And I'm in commerce, which is banking and insurance, but we're also consumer affairs. That's where the fun is.
Right.
Consumer affairs. That's the bones. Anyway, this is summer. We really don't have...
I'm glad you did the right thing there. Whatever you did, I have to tell you, I don't remember that vote, but it does illustrate another important point that I do like to emphasize whenever we talk about the legislative process in New Hampshire. It's wide open, and we have a legislative process that respects every state representative. And so they can bring in a bill on
Isn't
bones.
isn't that the truth?
They can. We had
Yeah.
one representative who brought in a bill, for example, that would require us to exhume the body, talking about bones, exhume the body of Meriwether Lewis and Clark, exhume his body to find out if he was really poisoned to death. Now, the body, I think, is in Kentucky.
I think they did, didn't they? Didn't they?
Well, they didn't do it because of anything
No,
the New Hampshire
no,
legislature
nothing
did.
from New Hampshire, but I think they.
But, you know, and so whether they did it or not, I mean, it's an interesting historical question. But it probably has nothing to do with what people send us there. And most folks will look at that and say, you know, that's kind of nutty. And I think most of us would agree that's a little bit beside the point, irrelevant, maybe even kind of nutty. But we respect the fact that a state representative elected by at least 3,300 people thought it was serious, and he represents those people, and we will consider the issue if he wants us to.
We
or she
will
wants us to.
consider it, and many times we do our best. Everybody has a right to bring it.
Right.
Also, I'll call it management has the right to say, call you in to the office and say, look, we do not believe that this is good, waste
Right.
of time, money, etc. But I've had this against me. For instance, the first thing I ever did was I wanted the Old Man of the Mountain put back. And there was no reason why. My uncle was an engineer, and he had looked at the whole thing and said, hey, it's not that difficult, not today, to put it back. And they called me down to the Speaker's office, and they lambasted me. And I said, no, I'm not, I'm sorry. I don't find that odd. I find that to be something that is our symbol. And not only that just look at tourism that it brought in. And so they beat me up on it.
And you can see there's difference of opinion.
Yes.
When I was Speaker, we brought in some of the representatives. Actually, the second half of the term managed to reduce the number of filed bills by, I think, over 200. By sitting there and just saying, you know, this isn't going to
Yes.
pass. You know, it may not be, for example, something that is going to be viewed very favorably outside of the State House. But a lot of our discussion would be, if you're going to be an effective state representative, remember, we don't have staff. We don't have the ability to, you know, put various staff members on various bills. It's just us. And unless you're an extraordinary representative, you probably can't handle more than 2, 3, 4 bills in any given session.
It's true.
Why don't you just focus on, you
It's
know,
true.
your top 2 or your top 3, rather than have 2 or 3 you really care about. Meanwhile, you want Meriwether Lewis's bones to be exhumed.
I know.
And all these other things, which, you know, may or may not be something we should consider, but is never going to pass. And it's just, you know, allows us to be viewed as somewhat frivolous.
Well, if I remember correctly, it was your time, your moment that you had the 200 foolish people bringing up all those, was because the Republican Democrats were really good, and never mind. We'll move on.
No, I shouldn't really mind that particular piece of fiction.
But
you know,
that is a good point. I think, and it's summer, so we're just not going to get too complicated about anything. But I think that's really a good point. I think New Hampshire, we're sort of in a sense made fun of a lot. We live free or die, and we don't get paid anything.
Well,
but we're pretty good government.
Yeah, and it's easy fodder for the newspapers. It's easy fodder from one party or the other party to take a look at the other's bills and say, you know, look at this particular nutty bill and that and that. And I think, you know, the price we pay as politicians, the price we pay as a state, is well worth it because we're open. The process is open, and you know, sometimes bills that come across, such as yours perhaps, on putting back the old man of the mountain, may be initially viewed as, you know, that's not too serious, but it's worthy of consideration, and it may well work. You know, you might be persuasive enough for it to work.
You know, my whole thing about that was, you really don't even have to build it. All you got to do is put 2 cameras up there and do something up there, and it would stream around the world, and by the time, if it ever got built, we'd have 1 billion people coming to New Hampshire to see it. I mean, today with all the technology.
On a more serious note, there was a British parliamentarian by the name of William Wilberforce. William Wilberforce was the first member of Parliament to file a bill in the early 19th century to outlaw slavery in the British Empire. And he was about the only one to vote on it. Now, he wasn't somebody who was totally out of the mainstream. He was, friends of the prime minister and so forth. But they all kind of viewed him as, it's not going to happen. It's pretty nutty. Who cares? And he fought that for a good couple of decades, to the point that the British Parliament, I think in the 1820s, outlawed slavery in the British Empire. So sometimes what appears foolish can, over time and debate, become viewed properly as a very serious
So
thing.
you're telling me that there's a possibility that the old man of the mountain would be rebuilt?
Yeah, perhaps not that. That's probably forever going to remain foolish.
I don't know why. I mean, I just can't figure it out.
But there are some bills, and I'll talk to some of the state reps about this, particularly when I was in a leadership role. I'd say part of what you're doing on some of these more controversial pieces of legislation is educating people, educating yourself, educating people. You find out where the opposition is. In subsequent filings, you can address the concerns that you might not have thought about in new language. Plus, you're educating people, and it's a good process for that reason.
Well, especially up here in New Hampshire. I mean, it's just so enormous, and 400 of us, and you're running for Congress, so you will not be in the House next
I'm exploring
term.
running for Congress, and I certainly won't be in the House next term.
No, you will not, and you're Bill O'Brien, and of course your competitor will be Andy Custer, who I'm voting for, and will help in any way that I can. So as long as we even that out, everybody understands that. So why don't we talk about that just a little? How's it going?
Well, it is the summer, and so I know that you and I have been having some conversations about some of the books that we're reading.
Yes.
It's a great time of the
Yes.
year to just sort of catch up on those long lists of books that kind of stack up or nowadays kind of build up in your electronic
I
reader.
have 50.
You have 50?
I have 50 that I could read if I wanted to.
And so what did you start off this summer with? Did you have a lot more than 50? Or?
No. I've always have about 20 that I'm reading or looking at from time to time. As I know, as we talked about it, I use Audible quite a bit, so I paint, so I listen. So recently, I did Washington, Eisenhower, Johnson, and I'm now working on Garfield. And I also just finished the President's Club. And this is, and of course, I'm painting too.
Right.
So if you're in a car or something, so I've done presidents.
Yeah.
And yourself, weren't you reading?
There's a number of
Bunker
different
Hill?
books. Yeah, I read some American history, including the Battle of Bunker Hill. Very, very interesting, a new perspective on it. And I think the author was Fisher, who just brought. You always think that at least in my case, I've done a lot of reading in Revolutionary War times and Civil War times. You think, well, I've got it, but then they'll come back with a history that just you learn so much more. I actually just finished a history of the Battle of Gettysburg done by, I'm going to try to remember his name, I think it's Gutierrez. He's a professor at Gettysburg College, and brought a clarity and to the battle that I hadn't seen before, and just information, just a perspective that I'd recommend that book to anyone. I really would if you're interested.
And the name of it is?
I think it's called Gettysburg. But in the authors, it just was published. The author is
Just published.
Yeah, it just
okay.
published last several months or so. Is Gutierrez. I think it was published because this, as you probably know, is the 150th anniversary of the Battle of Gettysburg.
And in the book of Eisenhower, that's where he built his home.
He did, yeah.
Next to Gettysburg,
Yeah.
and that was the reason why. As a general, and he spent a lot of time walking around there, and
Right.
As president.
And it's sort of interesting, and this is sort of the thing that thrills me as a student of American history. There'd always been this sort of belief that the Battle of Gettysburg was accidental, that you had I think the story goes, you had a Confederate unit searching for shoes or boots and went to Gettysburg, which had some factories that used to build. Not really, they were looking to battle. Both sides were looking for a battle. Now the Union forces would probably have just as soon had the battle where they'd set up defensive positions about 20 miles south of there, I think it was, near the Potomac River. But it became fairly clear this wasn't a bad place to confront the invading Confederates. And very interesting, very interesting.
We're talking about that, and I've also read about Lincoln, obviously, and wow, I have always had an interest, but not as much as I've had recently. And the more I read about the presidents, how interconnected, you really must get the President's Club, wow, because every president who left didn't really want to go.
Oh yeah.
Even Nixon, who sort of walked out, and good old Jerry was, his vice president Ford was put in. He gave him a hard time on the phone all the time, calling. And believe it or not, at the end, his best friend was Clinton.
It is interesting how over time the former presidents kind of gather around each other and have respect for each other. I mean, you're beginning to see that a little bit now, aren't you, with President Bush, George W. Bush, and President Obama.
Yes.
Which is, it's very interesting. Obviously,
well, his father, are you talking about
the son as well?
Well, did you hear about his father? What happened is that I guess they were collecting money for, was it Haiti, I believe, and they were traveling, and they were on an Air Force plane, obviously. It was, set up, and there was only really one bedroom. So Clinton gave it to the elder, and he got a blanket and slept on the floor outside the cabin. So the president, Bush, opens the door and he says, and there's the president of the United States, a former president, sleeping on the floor.
Those anecdotes are so interesting.
Oh,
they really
yeah.
Are. They really are. See, you read a recent biography of Roosevelt?
No, I haven't.
Oh, okay.
No.
Because they talk about a similar situation with Franklin Roosevelt and Winston Churchill. If you probably heard about this, after Winston, after America was attacked by Japan and Germany declared war on America, Winston Churchill came and sort of lived at the White House for about 2 or 3 weeks, trying to cement that relationship. And at one point, Winston Churchill is known to go around without clothes on in his own personal house. Came walking out of a door, and there was the president, and Churchill had no clothes on whatsoever, and looked at the president and said, well, Mr. President, as you can see, we're hiding nothing from you.
Oh.
Had you ever heard that?
No, I haven't heard, but
he was a person that just was never at a loss for words.
And can you imagine having Roosevelt and him together, because they both like to talk, they both had big egos, they both had big projects to work on, like Save the World, and you got those, that must have been really kind of magical moments.
It really must have been. And so, a lot of what I've been doing is reading history. I like to read military history. There's
why?
Because
military,
I think it both informs us as to how the world came to be the way it was. The various battles illustrate the trends in history well, and sometimes they just change history. A battle will change history. The Battle of Salamis, for example, in which the Persian Empire was beaten by the Greeks, allowed Western civilization to continue to flourish. And it was one of those inflection points in history. And I enjoy reading about men at their extreme and how they handle themselves and where they're great and where they're not great. Victor Davis Hanson, who's a historian of the ancient world, Grecian world, wrote a book that I just read, and it was on 3 generals talking about what was common about them.
Which generals?
General Sherman, General Patton, and then there was a Greek general by the name, I'm going to mispronounce his name, is Epimenides. Epimenides was a Theban general who overthrew Sparta. Sparta was the terror of ancient Greece. And it was such a terrible, terrible adversary that of all the Greek cities, Sparta never built walls around its city. It said, our walls are our shields. It went like that for 300 or 400 years. They terrorized the neighboring city-states and everything. And Thebes, which was not considered to be a very powerful state, had one man, Epimedes, who turned the whole situation around and sacked Sparta. Sparta was never great again. And he did it by disobeying orders. The Theban civil authorities at the time said, don't go to the Peloponnese, which is that peninsula of Sparta. Don't go down there.
Yes.
Do not antagonize the Spartans,
Yes.
And he did. And it's the same with Sherman. Sherman disobeyed, in a sense, orders. He took off out of Atlanta and marched to the sea. And people don't realize it was a very frightening time for the Unions because they lost contact with him. And they weren't sure, has he been decimated? What is going on? And then he arrives at Savannah and takes Savannah. And that was, he and Epimedes were very much alike, as was Patton. Patton was someone.
Oh, yes.
And
Yes.
they understood war
Yes.
very well. Patton was the one general the Germans feared because they realized that he had their number.
He was nuts.
He was nuts in a
Yes.
very effective way.
Yes.
One of the things that
Yes,
came out in this book is that Patton, when he was at war, most armies would kind of like move around, stop, look, and all that. He would be constantly outflanking. And not only that, he'd be acting as if there was a major enemy in front of him. So he was constantly shooting off artillery, and there'd be nothing out there. And as a consequence, German army would would run from him. Let me just I know we're running out of time, but let me just give you one illustrative point. Patton landed in Normandy about 6 weeks, I think it was, after the invasion. And at that point, the Allied army was still kind of bottled up in the Normandy Peninsula. Just couldn't, having all these frontal attacks. And the Germans were holding them up pretty well. Patton landed with the Eighth Army. Within about 5 weeks, they were on the Rhine. He'd maneuvered around them.
Yes.
They'd taken Paris. They were on the Rhine.
Well, we're talking about, this is just, again, we started the show by, we don't know what we're going to talk about, and we ended up talking about a half hour of, but there was one person, historically, probably as great as all these people, who was a Russian, who was told to press the button to send the missiles going over to the United States. And he refused to do it because he didn't believe that, he did not believe that the United States would do that. And in fact, one of the presidents or vice presidents went to the man's funeral. He died, I think, at 60, oh God, no, wait a minute. I think in 81 or 82. And I guess he was thrown out of the military. The military people really hated him, but he wouldn't do it. And he basically, in a sense, saved the world. So, on that note, please tell our audience where they can get in touch with you and how.
Well, you can contact me at my telephone number, 673-6610. Cell is 620-6610. And, or you can reach me at my email address, williamobrien@gmail.com.
And do you have a...
And a website, o'brienforcongress.com.
Okay. You're on Facebook?
I am.
All right.
Yeah.
So befriend.
Yeah, befriend
Befriend
me
our
or
friend.
just,
All
just
right.
make a comment or get on the webpage. Look forward to hearing from people.
Great. Okay. And you can get me at kgidge@aol.com or go to Gidge World, which is an art site. You can also befriend me on Facebook. And my phone number is 603-864-9332. And we'll see you next week. And we'll probably be doing about the same thing. And that's about just talking. See you next time.
Thank you, Ken.
Thank you.
preceding program was provided by an independent producer solely responsible for its content. The opinions expressed do not necessarily represent the views of this station, its staff, board of directors, or underwriters.